right, ladies and gentlemen. So we are going to be working on your Analyze Poetry Note Catcher. You just completed the first impressions part, so now we're going to get into the analysis. The directions tell you to work with a partner. Miss McMillan is going to be your partner today. So let's go ahead and start working together, starting with the gist. How is the poem organized? What is the gist of each section? So let's go back to our poem, The Negro Speaks of Rivers. And let's just look at the structure. Let's look at how it's organized. So this is one of the first poems that we're reading together for this topic. So poems are usually organized by stanzas. So lines grouped together in a poem are called a stanza. A stanza is very similar to a paragraph. So when a writer writes a story or an essay, they organize paragraphs around the same idea. But in a poem, a poet puts his lines into stanzas, and those lines are grouped together because they express a similar or common idea. So if we just look at this poem, we're just looking at the structure. Notice how it's got one big stanza here, and then it's got kind of a little stanza here, and then the last stanza is just one line. Also notice some of the lines are indented. It almost makes it seem as if it flows like a river, because it's smooth, and then it goes here, and then smooth, and then it goes here. So it's got that kind of flow to it, almost like a river. So I'm just going to jot down over here on my note catcher. The poem is organized by stanzas. It also includes indents that make it, I'm going to put look in quotations because I know it doesn't literally look like a river. It's not a concrete poem, but it does make it almost kind of have that flow in and out like a river. So the poem is organized by stanzas. And then I'm also going to talk about how it goes from a long stanza to shorter stanzas. And now I get to what is the gist of each section. So now let's look at each section. So let's look at this first one. I've known rivers ancient as the world. And then he goes on to describe each river: Euphrates, Congo, Nile, Mississippi, New Orleans. So this first stanza really talks about specific rivers that he's connected to. So I'm going to jot that down. And then the next part of the poem, I've known rivers, ancient, dusky rivers. I like how he uses that colon there. We've talked about the use of punctuation before. It makes us pause. I've known rivers, ancient, dusky rivers. I like that word ancient too, but we'll get to language in just a minute. So these last part of the poem, this one is like specific rivers. Here, he really emphasizes his connection. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. So I'm just going to add that to my notes as well. So here we have just our gist. So the general gist of this poem is that the speaker of the poem feels this deep connection to rivers. That's the gist. That's what the poem is about. So just looking on the surface of the poem, the speaker feels this connection to rivers. That's what we see as our gist. Now we're going to move on to a little bit of a closer look, specifically at structure and language. So let's start with structure. How does structure, including rhyme and repetition, contribute to meaning? So again, let's kind of look at how he organizes his ideas. First, I'm going to look for things that are repeated. Now, right away, notice how each of these lines, he's saying, I've known rivers. I've known rivers ancient as the world. My soul, I bathed, I built, I looked, I heard, I've known, my. So he is really repeating his connection to these rivers. Okay, so I'm going to add that first. Also tells me to look for rhyme. Now, this poem does not have any rhyme, so it's a free verse poem. There's no regular rhyme or rhythm to it, but it does have that repetition. It also repeats a whole line. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. So it also repeats that whole line with a similar effect of emphasizing his connection to these ancient rivers. And then notice how the poem is also organized chronologically. So, chronologically means organized by time. So, he starts with these very ancient rivers. The Euphrates was a very ancient river. We learned from our beginning, the Congo is also a very old river. The Nile, another old river. But there's this progression through time, starting with these very ancient times, working its way up to these modern times. So it's organized from the ancient rivers to the modern rivers. So I'm going to add that to my notes as well. So we're looking at structure. We've got repetition, and we also have chronological order. So those are the two kind of structures that we see happening here. He's emphasizing his connection to these rivers, and he's also moving us through time, starting with some of these ancient rivers that African Americans and African people started with. Here's where we started, and then here's where we were, and then here's where we are. So he's kind of moving through that timeline of history for that particular group of people. Now let's take a look at the language. How does the language, including word choice and figurative language in the poem, influence meaning? So word choice and figurative language, word choice and figurative language. So we learned last week about figurative language. So figurative language is when the writer says something that's not literal. So let's first just look for that. Let's first look for figurative language. And we're going to see that in the line that he repeats. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. He says that twice. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. Now, is his soul a literal river? No, he's comparing his soul to the rivers, and he's suggesting that he has this understanding of his connection to the past. So when he thinks back to these rivers that are so important in the timeline of African Americans, he feels this connection to these rivers. He wasn't at the Euphrates. He wasn't at the Congo. He wasn't at the Nile. He wasn't at Mississippi. He was not literally at these places, but he feels this connection to them, this connection to his past. So I'm going to add that line. And then also, we learned last week about the term an allusion, and we see some allusions here as well. He is alluding to these ancient rivers, these very historically important rivers, the Euphrates, the Congo, the Nile, the Mississippi. He is making allusions to all of those. Now, again, he is not literally at these rivers. This man is not, 300 years old. He just he feels like he is a part of his history. He is a part of his ancestors. He did not bathe there, he did not build a hut there, but he's seeing himself as an individual, a part of this very larger history. He is a part of this history, even though he was not literally there. It is a part of him, and he is a part of it. So I'm just going to add that to my notes. So let's look at that language one more time. We've got the line, my soul has grown deep like the rivers. And we've got all of these allusions to rivers. So that is just really the meaning that he's trying to get across here is that, yes, as an individual, I was not able to do all of these things, but this is my past. This is what made me who I am. I am a part of my past, and my past is a part of me. And we also see that in how we have the chronological order from ancient to modern. So we're seeing him kind of expressing that meaning with his structure and language. So go ahead and update your notes, and then we'll check back in together on theme in just a moment.